Game 9 ended with Naib successfully escaping imprisonment, but his current location remains unknown. It's unclear whether he's still trapped somewhere in the manor, or if he managed to escape entirely. What we know for sure is that the manor's mechanical system wasn't as flawless as it seemed, as Naib's escape proved that. Because of this, the manor's owner realized he needed to fix the gaps in it. To do that, he sought out mechanics and inventors, which led to the start of Game 10. Game 10 revolves around inventors, which is reflected in its participants. All of them have a background in invention. Confirmed participants include Luca Balsa, Charles Holt, and Tracy Reznik. There's also Wendy Foote, who hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but multiple hints strongly suggest she's involved. The designated hunter for this game is none other than Bonbon, a patrol robot created by Burke the head of security at the Manor. To piece together what happened in Game 10, I gathered information from multiple sources, including the Wiki, Reddit, and discussions within the community. And as always, while I try to present accurate information, this analysis is ultimately a theory. Although some details are drawn directly from the game files, it shouldn't be taken as official canon due to the storytelling of IDV lore makes it prone to different interpretation. Also, because the story is continually evolving with new clues and birthday letters, this analysis reflects the information available up to February 2025. If you're viewing this after the story's completion, some details might not align with the final version. This is your broadcaster, Silmina, signing in. Tracy Reznik came to the manor for two main reasons. First, she was in debt and needed the prize money to pay it off. But more importantly, she was searching for mechanical parts to complete her most personal invention, a mechanical doll modeled after her father, whom she loved dearly. His death, which seemed to be the result of foul play, deeply affected her life story. Tracy was extremely close to her father, Mark, as she never got to know her mother, Irene, who passed away from illness shortly after giving birth to her. Mark, a watchmaker, raised Tracy on his own, with his love for her evident in the way he always included her in his life. Even while working, he talked to her, sharing his thoughts and stories. And every Christmas, without fail, he'd make sure she had new clothes, a small gesture that spoke volumes of his devotion. Growing up surrounded by the ticking clocks and intricate machinery of his trade sparked something in Tracy, igniting a passion for mechanics that burned bright from a very young age. When Tracy was 10, Mark noticed something strange. Some broken pendulums in his workshop would mysteriously be fixed by the next morning. One night, he secretly watched to see what was happening, only to discover that Tracy had been repairing it herself. That was when he realized his daughter was a mechanical genius. Overwhelmed with pride, he wished Irene were still alive to see how brilliant their daughter had become. As Tracy grew older, her skills in mechanics only improved. Her biggest breakthrough came when she invented a watch mechanism that combined traditional mechanics with electricity, using electromagnetic fluctuations to minimize errors. This innovation gained widespread recognition, making Mark's watch studio famous. Proud of his daughter's success, Mark opened a separate studio just for Tracy, encouraging her to continue her research in electricity and machinery. During this time, Tracy also created a mechanical doll, which she used to play pranks on her father, like hiding small parts from his studio. At some point, Burke Lapadura, an inventor from Olettis Manor, visited Mark and commissioned him to adjust the delay mechanism in one of his creations, which is a robot named Bonbon. Despite his expertise, Mark was unable to perfect the mechanism and could only improve it to a limited extent. Tracy, who was also involved in the project, theorized that the delay mechanism might be autonomous or perhaps even have a will of its own. Her curiosity grew, prompting Mark to ask Burke to share the secret behind Bonbon's design. However, given the later events at the manor, it seems Burke never revealed the truth. Time passed by, and unfortunately, Mark's success attracted unwanted attention. Rival watchmakers grew jealous and tried to buy her invention. But Mark refused, saying they would have to wait until Tracy was old enough to decide for herself, since it was her creation. This wasn't the answer they wanted, and like every villain in a story, they resorted to foul play. Someone tampered with Mark's workshop, leading to a devastating explosion. Mark was trapped in the fire and didn't survive. When Tracy arrived, it was already too late. Soon after, Tracy was notified that Mark had accumulated a massive amount of unpaid debt. Suppliers claimed he had ordered expensive materials just before the explosion, which he hadn't paid for. This led to speculation that the debt might have been fabricated by his rivals as part of a larger scheme. I tried to find a definitive source to confirm whether the debt was real or fake, but I couldn't. If you have any insights, feel free to share them in the comments. In the midst of this crisis, those same competitors returned, and again, offering to buy Tracy's invention. Instead of giving them an answer right away, she told them she needed time to decide. Then, something strange happened. Over the next 6 months, a series of explosions, eerily similar to the one that destroyed Mark's workshop, rocked the area. The police investigated but found no real clues, only strange metal parts at the scene of each blast. Many fans believe Tracy was behind these attacks, seeking revenge for her father's death. This theory is supported by several clues. For example, despite her known hatred of explosions, she invested money in gunpowder. Some of her character skins in the game also hint at this vengeful path. And because she cleverly used her secret mechanical dolls to carry out the explosions, the police never suspected her, even though they found the mechanical joints at the scene. In the end, Tracy never sold her invention. The rival watchmakers met their end, but by that point, Tracy had spent so much money on her revenge, buying mechanical parts, explosives, and materials that she was buried in debt. Still, she wasn't done building. She wanted to create something even more advanced, a mechanical doll that resembled her father. However, she was missing a crucial part, one she couldn't find anywhere. It was around this time that a familiar supplier sent her a letter recommending Olitis Manor, claiming it could provide exactly what she was looking for. Without hesitation, Tracy tore out the address and made her way to the manor, joining Game 10.
After sunset, I'm an engineer for Sonora Aero Club. When the final screw was put in place, it took flight like a blessing from fate itself. But the sun always rises. Fate hanged me high above on frames of steel. Luckily, I had a loyal companion. Let's leave this place. We'll fly over that skyscraper. Until I sold my blessing for a decent fortune. He took flight at a price exacted by fate. Let's leave this place. We'll fly over that skyscraper. As for this letter, is it a way to escape the curse of fate? Or perhaps a temptation to fly once once again.
Charles Holt was released in July 2023, but as we all know, he still hasn't received his birthday letter. Because of this, his exact reason for joining the Manor remains unclear. We can only piece together vague hints from his promotional video and backstory. Still, here's what we know so far. Before arriving at the Manor, Charles worked as a construction worker by day, but by night, he was an engineer for the Sonora Aero Club. While the game doesn't provide much detail about the club, historical references suggest it was a secret group of aviation enthusiasts who gathered in Sonora, California. Charles had always been passionate about flying and spent his time designing various flying machines. One of his most notable inventions was the Aeros, a jetpack prototype. However, as revealed in his third deduction quest, the Aeros was far from perfect. It had major flaws that needed fixing before it could operate safely. During his time as a construction worker, Charles met Albert Wayne, a fellow aviation enthusiast. They bonded over their shared dream of flying, often imagining a future where Albert would pilot one of Charles's machines. Eventually, Charles sold the Aeros to a construction company, though it's unclear whether it was the company he worked for or another one. Albert was chosen as the test pilot, making their dream feel closer than ever. But fate had other plans. The Aeros initially soared to great heights, but then it malfunctioned. This time, the failure was fatal, as Albert fell to his death. To make things worse, the construction company refused to take responsibility. This is mainly speculative, but if we look into Charles's sixth deduction note and his backstory, Albert's death was officially ruled as human error in piloting, rather than a flaw in the machine. This cleared both the company and Charles of any liability. Sometime later, the same construction manager completed the project and went to the media, crediting the builders for their hard work. With this, Albert's accident was quickly forgotten, buried under corporate success. Charles, however, couldn't move on. Consumed by guilt over Albert's death and his own inaction over it, he turned to alcoholism, which eventually affected his motor skills. This downward spiral continued until one day, he received a letter from the Manor. It offered him a chance at redemption. What exactly this redemption means is still unclear. If I had to take a guess, the Manor's owner might have given Charles the opportunity to perfect the Aeros so future accidents could be avoided. Another possibility is that Charles was forced to face his past and acknowledge the real cause of the crash, which is not human error, but the flaws in his design. However, given Game 10's inventor theme, the first theory seems more likely.
If hurricanes could be predicted, perhaps Father would still be with us. Windmills are born to turn, Wendy. Your storm glass is sure to work.
The heavens are sure to open today. I just know it'll rain any moment now.
Such disasters cannot be avoided. Although, my child, you do possess an uncanny talent for studying the weather. But, Mother, even if I were to pour my very heart and soul into it before this insurmountable precipice, science turns a deaf ear to my pleas. When evasion avails us not, when destiny ushers towards us a mighty hurricane. I will guide the storm and shatter this ludicrous obstacle. I will scatter the fog and seek the locus where the light converges. The downpour will return, and the truth will be mine to tell.
Wendy Foote is the newest addition to the game, and because she hasn't received her birthday letter yet, we still don't have a complete picture of her backstory. Her participation in Game 10 is also unconfirmed, but multiple hints suggest she might be part of it. So far, Wendy has only appeared in Season 35, Essence 3, with no presence in side stories and no C-tier skins, making her lore even harder to piece together. However, if we combine the fragments of her backstory with her real-life inspiration, Eunice Foote, an early meteorology researcher, here's what we know. Wendy grew up in a rural part of Connecticut, living a peaceful life with her parents, but everything changed when a hurricane struck their home. Despite taking shelter, the storm was so powerful that it takes her father away, killing him as Wendy and her mother watched in horror. The loss devastated her, and she became obsessed with one thought. If storms could be predicted, maybe her father would still be alive. From that moment on, Wendy dedicated herself to meteorology, determined to give people early warnings about incoming storms. While other children played with dolls, she spent her days conducting weather experiments, using whatever she could find, such as field chemicals, glass jars, and weather study books. She tried to understand how storms worked. One of her most notable methods involved flying kites to predict the weather, inscribing her deepest wish onto them. If hurricanes could be predicted, perhaps Father would still be with us. Her experiments, however, often failed, and people dismissed her predictions as nonsense. But no matter how much doubt surrounded her, her mother always encouraged her, pushing her to continue. Then came the breakthrough Wendy desperately needed. One day, her research accurately predicted an approaching storm. She warned the community, and sure enough, the storm arrived just as she had foretold. This should have been a moment of victory, proof that her methods worked. But instead of celebrating her success, the townspeople turned on her. Rather than seeing her as a hero, they blamed her for the disaster, as if she had caused the storm herself. Despite the town turning against her, Wendy's mother remained her unwavering supporter. Ignoring the stigma, she focused on Wendy's potential and, with the help of a friend, managed to get her into a women's college in New York. At college, Wendy's research started yielding incredible results. She discovered that carbon dioxide levels could influence temperature, which is a groundbreaking finding for the time. It was also here that she met a research colleague named Camilla, whom she described as a dependable companion. However, Camilla eventually left academia due to unforeseen circumstances. In a letter, she expressed hope that Wendy would continue her scientific journey. If I had to guess, based on Wendy's sixth deduction quest and her real-life inspiration, Eunice Foote, Camilla likely left because of the barriers women faced in science during the Victorian era. Back then, women were still seen as inferior to men in academic and scientific fields. The same issue seemed to affect Wendy directly. Her thesis was rejected, likely due to gender discrimination. But Wendy refused to let her research disappear. To ensure her work reached the public, she was forced to publish it under someone else's name. According to her seventh deduction quest, that person was Henry, who I believe is inspired by Joseph Henry, the scientist who, in real life, presented Eunice Foote's work instead of her. However, there's also a mention of Ford in the seventh deduction quest. I haven't been able to find out who this refers to. After her research was published under Henry's name, Wendy's colleagues slowly distanced themselves from her, leaving her to continue her work alone. Then, one day, while reading the newspaper, she came across an article on weather research. To her shock, the theory mentioned in the article was almost identical to hers, likely the very thesis that was rejected. For Wendy, this became a turning point. She was determined to uncover the truth about the researcher who was now getting widespread attention for findings, eerily similar to hers. Had this person knowingly stolen her work, or was it just a coincidence? Either way, Wendy needed answers, and she was willing to go to great lengths to get them. She spent all her savings traveling overseas, chasing down leads about this mysterious researcher. Unfortunately, her efforts led nowhere. The constant search must have left her feeling frustrated and desperate. Watching someone else take credit for her hard work was a devastating blow. Then, the story takes a darker turn. Wendy receives disturbing news from her hometown. If you've seen her backstory video, there's a brief image of a woman lying in bed, suggesting something terrible happened to her mother. Whether she was seriously ill or had already passed away is unclear, but either way, this tragedy only added to Wendy's mounting despair. Just when it seemed like she had hit rock bottom, Wendy received an unexpected invitation to a scientific research event. This invitation came from the Manor owner. With nothing to lose, and wanting to honor her mother and Camilla's wishes, she accepted.
这份卑微的工作也不记得做了多久，我好像什么都不记得了，除了关于那件发明的模糊记忆。初次相见就已经确定，除了他，我再也不会喜欢别的事物了。要知道，拥有自己的发明，那种感觉真是太美好了。 可他为什么总觉得我的想法是错的？直到电流直击大脑，我仍然没有找到这个答案。他死了，但谁又能保证下一个不会是我呢？后来，有人帮我脱了罪，但侥幸逃生或许更糟糕。那伟大的发明依旧无法完成，直到那封信的出现。 我相信，他会让一切继续。
Luca's story is deeply intertwined with another character, the hermit, Alva Lorenz. However, in this video, I'll be focusing only on Luca's backstory. If you want to fully understand the connection between Luca and Alva, you can check out Alva's lore as well, or stick around, since I plan to cover his story in a future video. Luca was born to a nobleman named Hermann Zeman, who later took the name Hermann Balsa after marriage, though some speculated he changed his name to separate himself from his noble family. Even though Hermann came from a noble family, his interests lay elsewhere: science. And not just any science. He was obsessed with the idea of a perpetual motion machine. Alongside his best friend and fellow researcher, Alva Lorenz, Hermann dedicated himself to making this impossible concept a reality. However, Hermann eventually had to step away from the project for 2 years due to personal obligations. During that time, Alva continued the research alone, though his enthusiasm gradually faded. When Hermann returned, he was as determined as ever, if not more. But by then, Alva had reached a painful realization. The machine they were working on could never truly exist. This difference in belief led to a heated argument between the two, causing them to go their separate ways. Herman's life took a downward spiral. He had poured his entire fortune into his research, leaving him in deep debt. Struggling financially, he resorted to selling off his old research scripts just to survive. However, even as he ran out of money, his obsession never wavered. Instead of using what little he had left for survival, Herman continued investing everything into his research. His desperation pushed him to a devastating decision. He sold off his wife's dowry to fund his work. This was the breaking point. His wife, overwhelmed by anger and despair, fell gravely ill. With her health rapidly declining, she passed away, with only Luca by her side at her deathbed. Luca was devastated, but instead of comforting his son, Herman coldly told him to brush off his emotions and move on. This callousness filled Luca with resentment, ultimately driving him to leave his father behind. Not long after, Herman met his own tragic end. He died in an accident, and while the exact details remain unclear, it is heavily speculated that his death occurred during an experiment related to the perpetual motion machine. Time passed, and an industrial expo was held in town, attracting inventors from all over the world. Among them was the town's most renowned inventor, none other than Alva Lorenz. Now a grown man, Luca attended the expo and approached Alva, neither of them realizing that their pasts were already connected through Herman Balsa. Luca had long admired Alva's work, but seeing him present the concept of a perpetual motion machine only deepened his admiration. Inspired by Alva's vision, Luca decided to reach out to him directly. In a letter, Luca expressed his desire to become Alva's student, believing that the perpetual motion machine could still be achieved. As proof of his dedication, he included Herman's old research scripts along with his own thesis, hoping they would be enough to convince Alva to accept him, which they were. After being accepted as Alva Lorenz's apprentice, Luca quickly proved himself to be a talented researcher. His brilliance didn't go unnoticed. The townspeople even started calling him Lorenz Jr., seeing him as Alva's natural successor. Luca continued working on the perpetual motion machine, fully devoted to what he believed could be the invention of a lifetime. However, during his research, he uncovered something shocking, which is evidence that his father, Herman Balsa, had worked alongside Alva on the same machine years ago. This revelation shattered Luca's admiration for Alva. He became convinced that Alva had stolen Herman's work and claimed it as his own. The mentor he had idolized was now, in his eyes, nothing more than a fraud. Luca would soon confront Alva about this, and the news about this would soon spread to the town. Things took a darker turn when some of Alva's manuscripts went missing. Alva reported the theft to the police, suspecting that a competitor had gotten their hands on his research. However, he also suspected Luca's involvement. This led to a heated confrontation between the two, further deepening the rift between them. Luca was completely fixated on building a perpetual motion machine, even though things were getting tense around him. He kept experimenting, and just like his dad, it all blew up in his face. His experiment went terribly wrong, causing a massive explosion that killed Alva, just like the one that killed Herman. Luca survived, but he had no idea what happened. All he could think about was finishing that machine. The aftermath was devastating. He was arrested and almost executed, but the court eventually annulled his sentence. Even so, he lost everything: his good name, his chance to keep researching, and all his money, which he had to give to Alva's wife as compensation. Even though he was ruined, Luca still wanted to finish his project. He still wanted to build his invention, but he was broke and couldn't do it. Then, when he was at his lowest point, he got a mysterious invitation to a manor. They promised him a chance to continue his research. With nothing left to lose and everything to gain, Luca decided to go for it. He'd risk it all to finally build that perpetual motion machine. So, he went to the manor, determined to make his dream a reality.
在图纸上画下第一条线时，我想要得到一个帮手，一台不知疲倦、冷静高效、完美精确的机器。
很高兴认识你，邦邦。
从人类那里获得名字的26号开始，将时间浪费在探索自我上。工具不需要姓名，更不需要自我。然而，被赋予的意志却不是那么容易被磨灭。无论我更换多少次中央枢纽，修改多少次规则，每次重启后，26号都会播放同一句话。
Bonbon is the designated hunter for Game 10. It was created by Burke Lepadura, the Manor's chief of security. Bonbon is a bulky robot resembles a penguin, originally built as part of Burke's many attempts to design a functional machine. Since Bonbon is a robot, it should be genderless, although further clues suggest that Bonbon is designed to be a male. Before Bonbon, he had already tried 25 times, but all of those attempts failed. Bonbon, his 26th creation, was the first to meet his expectations. In Game 10, Bonbon serves as an executioner, carrying out security duties by monitoring and intervening when necessary. Before becoming the deadly machine it is now, Bonbon was originally built for simple tasks like construction work and babysitting the manor's children, including Alistaros and Orpheus. The name Bonbon actually came from little Alice. When she first met it, she cheerfully said, "Nice to meet you, Bonbon." That moment got permanently stored in Bonbon's memory. Even though Burke found Alice and Orpheus annoying, deep down, he actually cared about them. He just never showed it. Clues about it can be found in several side stories involving him that he cares a lot about children and youngsters. Later on, Burke modified Bonbon to take on security duties by installing explosives inside it. While Bonbon proved to be effective in security tasks, the explosives detonated too quickly, which led Burke to seek help from a watchmaker to adjust the timing mechanism. That watchmaker was none other than Mark Reznik. Mark struggled to make precise adjustments, only managing to improve the timing to a limited extent, far from Burke's expectations. He also showed an interest in Bonbon's inner workings, mentioning that his daughter was obsessed with it. When tragedy struck at the manor, he was overwhelmed with guilt. Blaming himself for what happened, he decided to modify Bonbon even further, adding more weapons to make sure such an accident would never happen again. What was once just a simple babysitting machine was turned into a deadly executioner. The events of Game 10 can be pieced together through letters from Luca, Tracy, Bonbon, and Burke. This means that most of what we know about the game revolves around these four characters. However, there is still no clear information about Charles's role or Wendy's, assuming she even participated in Game 10. The wording of the letters makes it difficult to fully understand the whole picture. While the conclusion of Game 10 is somewhat clear, I personally struggle to grasp the reasoning behind everything that happened, let alone the exact timeline of events. That's why, once again, I want to remind you that the events depicted in the video will also contain my assumptions, though I'll try to apply the best logic possible. Feel free to share your thoughts or insights if you have any, because, to be honest, I'm still struggling to put everything together. The purpose of Game 10 was to assess the risks posed by the operational mechanisms of the Manor's experiments. This was likely prompted by Naib's escape in the previous game, making the Manor owner eager to ensure that the gates, cipher machines, and other security measures were functioning properly. Tracy was a perfect fit for this task, so she was the first to arrive, replacing a previous participant. It is currently unknown who that person was. Some speculate it was Wendy, while others believe it might have been Burke himself. The exact start date of Game 10 is unclear, but we do know that it took place in the lakeside village. Since Game 9 happened in December between 1899 and 1901, Game 10 likely occurred sometime between early 1900 and 1902. The story of Game 10 kicked off when one of the original participants dropped out, which is how Tracy ended up at the Manor as the first confirmed player. It's unclear if she knew about the game beforehand, but in her fourth letter, she hints that the whole experiment felt like some kind of game, so maybe she pieced it together over time. During Game 10, Orpheus made it pretty obvious what was really going on. So, at some point, both Tracy and Luca likely figured it out too. The game, the experiment, and what their invitations actually meant. After coming into the Manor, Tracy started exploring the Manor peculiarities while searching for parts to perfect her mechanical doll, which resembled her father. In my view, she may have also been looking for a way to make her doll move on its own, inspired by her earlier theory of autonomous machines when she worked on Bonbon's mechanical parts years ago. According to her third letter, her intelligence and curiosity became a concern for the Manor's owner, who deployed an executioner early to monitor the situation. That executioner was Burke, not Bonbon, at least not yet. 2 days later, Luca arrived at the Manor. Tracy noted that he seemed educated, but his appearance made him seem untrustworthy. Their initial interaction was brief, as they were both focused on their own tasks. However, later on, Luca greeted Tracy while she was about to dismantle a clock, asking her for the time. Luca observed her in silence, seemingly lost in thought. Noticing this, Tracy explained she was a watchmaker who had invented various watch components, some of which could fix the broken clock. She suggested that the clock had stopped either because the battery had died or because it needed rewinding. Luca seemed intrigued by her explanation and muttered to himself, almost scornfully, repeating the words battery and rewinding. Confused, Tracy asked him what was wrong. Luca responded by saying that the word invention should only be used for creations that improve upon something fundamentally new, rather than just extending the lifespan of existing technology. He also mentioned that there were far better, more permanent solutions than batteries or traditional ticking clock mechanisms, clearly referencing his obsession with perpetual motion machines. Tracy was aware of the concept Luca was talking about, but to her, it sounded unrealistic. She believed that a clock that could run forever and remain perfectly accurate was either the greatest invention ever or an impossible fantasy. Instead of pursuing such an idea, she thought it would be more practical to focus on improving energy efficiency. This moment highlights the stark contrast between their ideals. Luca believed Tracy's work was merely extending the life of existing inventions, while Tracy didn't believe perpetual motion could ever be a reality. Tracy was already aware of Bonbon's presence and grew curious about it. Based on the Christmas event, it's reasonable to assume that her curiosity stemmed from Bonbon's autonomy. She concluded that both Bonbon and its creator were worth investigating. While using her mechanical doll to spy on Bonbon, she noticed that Luca was also lurking nearby. Perhaps due to their shared interest in machinery, Luca and Tracy started getting along, at least on the surface. They began tinkering with Bonbon, both fascinated by its design. For Tracy, this was especially important, as her main goal at the manor was to complete her mechanical doll, which was essentially a robot in itself. She wanted to know if Bonbon's mechanical parts could be useful for her own creation. Days passed, and Luca and Tracy kept working together to uncover the risks in the manor's operational mechanism. However, I never knew the details of these risks, or what kind of security measures the manor even had, as it was never clearly stated. So if you know any of it, or have some theories for it, feel free to add in the comment. From Burke's second letter and Tracy's third letter, we know that they worked exceptionally well together in exposing these vulnerabilities. Luca was cooperative and helped Tracy with her work, which she referred to as the last component. While they continued their research, they also kept tinkering with Bonbon, much to Burke's frustration. At the same time, it made him feel sentimental. Watching them work together reminded him of Orpheus and Alice. Even though Burke knew that these two were getting dangerously close to uncovering the manor's secrets, he couldn't help but admire their teamwork. In one of his letters, he even mentioned that Luca and Tracy were so skilled that they probably could have completed the task on their own, even without the other two participants. But this also raised two big questions in Burke's mind. First, what if Luca and Tracy had worked separately instead of together? Would they have still succeeded in the experiment? And second, would the manor's owner really let people walk away alive after learning its secrets? As time went on, Tracy kept tinkering with Bonbon, and at some point, she did something that caused it to malfunction. This frustrated Burke, who mentioned that it was the first time Bonbon had ever acted that way. He had to order new parts to repair it and firmly dismissed the idea of an autonomous robot, calling it impossible. However, Burke soon realized something else. While Luca and Tracy were great at working together, they were ultimately moving toward different goals, as Tracy was pursuing to perfect the mechanical doll, and Luca wanted to complete the perpetual motion machine. In essence, Luca and Tracy are just too different to keep working together. One notable difference is how they each see their fathers. I'm guessing that during their time tinkering with Bonbon, Tracy might have told Luca about the doll and how she wants to bring it back to life, like it's going to replace her father. Luca, based on his own relationship with his dad, probably made fun of her, and they got into a fight about it. Keep in mind that this is just my theory, though. And, like any partnership with conflicting ambitions, their cooperation eventually fell apart. According to Luca's letter, his overconfidence and cynicism led to the breakdown of their teamwork. Burke was clearly disappointed by this, though his exact reasons are unclear. Around this time, Tracy also set a trap for Luca, confident that she could control the situation. She seemed to believe that Luca's lack of experience would work against him, slowing him down. However, this part is a bit unclear, and I'm not entirely sure how it played out. After their split, Tracy continued working on her mechanical doll. At some point, she stole Bonbon's stability component, which caused the robot to become self-aware, as if it had a mind of its own. This infuriated Burke yet again, forcing him to order another batch of replacement parts. He decided to take matters into his own hands and planned to step in the next day with what he called more instructive intervention. While the exact meaning of this isn't clear, it likely meant that Burke, who had so far been observing from the sidelines, was now going to directly interfere, possibly to teach Tracy a lesson. In Burke's eyes, machines were just machines. Giving them autonomy or treating them as if they had feelings was a complete betrayal of science. He was convinced that Tracy would eventually come to understand this, but for now, his focus was on fixing Bonbon. The replacement parts had arrived, and according to him, this would be the second and final time Bonbon would ever go out of control. The next day, Tracy started having doubt. She wrote in her diary that she didn't fully trust her teammates or the game itself. She even suspected someone might be sabotaging it. She reminded herself to be extra careful moving forward. She also mentioned the promised reward, saying it felt like a test in itself, and she wasn't sure whether she should take it or leave it. That afternoon, a new participant arrived, Charles Holt. Tracy tried to get on his good side by talking about things they had in common, and he seemed to warm up to her. But something felt off. Charles didn't seem proud of his designs at all. Instead, he was way more interested in plane crashes, and the stuff he collected about them wasn't just for improving aircraft. That made Tracy even more suspicious. He seemed friendly enough, but could she really trust him? At the same time, Luca also tried to connect with Charles. At first, he sympathized with him due to similar experiences, but things changed quickly, as Luca's attitude shifted to outright hostility, and in one of his letters, he even had a murderous intent toward Charles. There are a few theories about why. Some say it reminded him of Alva selling off his script, while others think it was because Charles was an alcoholic, which could have brought back bad memories of Luca's father. But there's another possibility. Charles had signed a document stating that his friend's accident was due to negligence when, in reality, it was caused by flaws in his jetpack design. Luca has always had a strong sense of disgust toward betrayal, so maybe he saw Charles's actions as exactly that, betraying Albert to save himself. Still, we don't have enough details to say for sure. Later that afternoon, another participant arrived, most likely Burke himself, disguising as a player. Tracy wanted to talk to him, but she was wary of his assistant, who was strongly implied to be Bonbon. She had a feeling that Bonbon had a mind of its own, which meant she had to be careful around it. Despite all of this, Tracy was determined to win the game. From what I can gather, she seemed to think the best way to do that was by getting Luca out of the picture. That's why she figured the four of them needed to team up. But here's the weird part. By that time, the four available players were Luca, Charles, Burke, and herself. So, who was the fourth person she was talking about? Was she counting Bonbon as a participant? Or perhaps, by that time, Wendy has arrived, but hasn't been mentioned yet anywhere? That part still doesn't make much sense to me, and I haven't figured out what she really meant. When the game officially started, Luca explored the venue, focusing on its electrical systems. His goal? To win the game by himself. We don't have all the details of what happened next, but based on his third and fourth letters, it's clear he was determined to come out as the sole survivor. He had a plan going in, but at some point, he had to improvise. In the end, his strategy involved rigging everything and blowing the place apart, ensuring he was the last one standing. I'd guess that Luca's method involved overloading some kind of electrical machinery in the game, maybe even Bonbon itself. Since Luca is somewhat resistant to electrocution and had already studied the venue's electrical setup, he might have planned to electrocute everything around him, ensuring that only he would make it out alive. That plan seems to have worked because, in Luca's fourth letter, he describes how his left arm was left completely immobile while his right arm remained functional. Everything had gone according to his plan. He also mentions vomiting after emptying his stomach, which could imply that he was the only survivor, everyone else was dead, and the realization made him sick. Bonbon's fourth letter gives more details. After the incident, Burke declared the game over, with Luca as the last one standing. He then started cleaning up the aftermath, which included Tracy's unfinished mechanical doll, a script titled "The Heart of the Machine," and other scattered remains. The letter also hints at what Tracy had been trying to do. She was modifying her mechanical doll, making it capable of mimicking actions on its own, just like Bonbon. She had even stolen Bonbon's stabilizer and combined it with pieces of her late father's pocket watch, possibly placing them in the doll's chest, right to where a heart would be. Aside from that, Burke also found Charles's jetpack near the water, far from where Charles's body was discovered. There were also chemical vials containing ammonium nitrate, which likely belonged to Wendy. This suggests that Wendy had also participated in the game, though her role is still unclear. Luca may have been the last one standing, but that didn't mean he was free. The manor owner decided to keep him for a second experiment, promising freedom if he completed it. Luca, obsessed with finishing his perpetual motion machine, agreed without hesitation. However, after the first game, his mind became even more unstable. Meanwhile, as Burke cleaned up the game venue, he had a moment of deep reflection. He started questioning everything: what he was doing, his role in all of this, and how he viewed the manor owner. In his diary, he admitted that he once believed he and Bonbon were key players in the experiment, but now, he wasn't so sure. He feared that they were just disposable tools, meant to be used and eventually discarded. In the end, he wished that at least one rational person would make it out alive. However, when writing to the manor owner, Burke hid his doubts. Instead, he claimed he was ready for his next assignment, and even apologized for getting too emotionally involved in the experiment. Still, in Luca's fourth letter, there's a hint that Burke actually left the manor, leaving behind his hidden room for Luca to take over. This part is up for debate. Some believe he didn't leave permanently, others think he later returned as part of the cult, and some argue he never left at all. After surviving the game, Luca moved into Burke's secret room, but one day, he noticed someone watching him from the shadows. The sight of this person sent chills down his spine. It was Alva Lorenz, a man who should have been long dead. This eerie moment would mark the beginning of the next phase of the experiment, often referred to as Game 10 Part 2, or Game 11, depending on how you look at it. A battle between science and the supernatural was about to unfold. And that wraps up today's video. If you're interested, I highly recommend reading all the letters and files yourself to get a clearer picture of what happened in Game 10. This theory is a mix of canonical events and my own interpretation, so there might be details I missed, and I'm sorry if there is any. Let me know your thoughts in the comment. This is your broadcaster, Silmina, signing out.